Sarah Chun walked across the concrete courtyard of Westfield Military Academy, her boots clicking against the pavement in perfect rhythm. The morning sun cast long shadows between the towering brick buildings, and the air carried the familiar sounds of cadets preparing for another day of training. She clutched her physics textbook against her chest, reviewing formulas in her mind as she headed toward the science building. At 19, Sarah had already proven herself academically superior to most of her classmates. Her test scores consistently ranked in the top 5%, and her tactical analysis papers had earned praise from even the strictest instructors. But none of that seemed to matter to certain groups within the academy walls. "Look who thinks she belongs here," came a voice from behind her. Sarah recognized the speaker without turning around. Cadet Marcus Wheeler, son of a decorated general, had made her life difficult since the first week of classes. His father's reputation opened doors that hard work alone could never unlock, and Marcus used that privilege like a weapon against anyone he deemed unworthy of wearing the academy uniform. "Just keep walking," she whispered to herself, maintaining her steady pace toward the entrance of the science building. But Wheeler wasn't alone this morning. 3 other cadets flanked him as they caught up to Sarah near the stone steps leading to the building's main entrance. James Morrison, whose grandfather had attended the academy in the 1940s. David Kim, whose family had military connections dating back generations. And Robert Hayes, whose uncle served as a colonel at the Pentagon. "We need to talk," Wheeler said, stepping into Sarah's path. Sarah stopped and looked up at the 4 young men blocking her way. Each stood at least 6 inches taller than her 5'4" frame, their shoulders broad beneath their pressed uniforms. She had faced intimidation before, but something felt different about this encounter. Their expressions carried a cold determination she hadn't seen previously. "I have class in 10 minutes, she said calmly, though her heart had begun beating faster. "This won't take long," Morrison replied, his voice carrying a threatening undertone that made other passing cadets glance nervously in their direction before quickly looking away. The science building's entrance stood at the top of a stone staircase with 15 steep steps. Sarah had climbed these same stairs hundreds of times during her 2 years at the academy. The steps were worn smooth by decades of military boots, and iron handrails ran along both sides. During winter months, ice often formed on the stone surface, making the stairs treacherous without careful attention to footing. "You don't belong here," Kim said, his words echoing off the brick walls surrounding them. "This academy has traditions, standards, things you clearly don't understand." Sarah shifted her textbook to her left arm and squared her shoulders. She had heard these arguments countless times before, but she refused to let intimidation tactics drive her away from her goals. Her acceptance to Westfield had come through merit, not connections or family legacy. "My grades speak for themselves," she replied steadily. "I earned my place here through hard work, same as anyone else." Wheeler laughed, but the sound held no humor. "Hard work? You think studying makes you qualified to lead soldiers in combat? You think passing tests prepares you for making life and death decisions under fire?" "I think competence matters more than connections," Sarah answered, her voice growing stronger despite the threatening atmosphere surrounding her. The confrontation had begun attracting attention from other cadets passing through the courtyard. Some slowed their pace to observe the interaction, while others deliberately looked away and hurried past. The unspoken code among students at military academies often discouraged intervention in conflicts between cadets, especially when those conflicts involved issues of social hierarchy and family influence. Hayes stepped closer to Sarah, forcing her to take a step backward toward the stairs. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. We're trying to help you understand reality before you embarrass yourself and this institution." "The reality is that I belong here," Sarah said firmly. "The admissions board, the academic committee, and my instructors all believe I have what it takes to succeed. Your personal opinions don't change those facts." Morrison's face darkened with anger. "Personal opinions? This isn't personal. This is about maintaining the integrity of an institution that has produced great military leaders for over a century." People like you cheapen everything this place represents. Sarah felt her own anger rising, but forced herself to remain calm. Losing control would only give them more ammunition to use against her later. She had learned to choose her battles carefully during her time at the academy, understanding that some fights were worth having while others only led to more problems. "I need to get to class," she said, attempting to step around Wheeler. But Wheeler moved to block her path again, his three companions closing ranks behind him. The message was clear. This conversation would end on their terms, not hers. "Class can wait," Wheeler said. "This is more important than whatever academic exercise you think makes you special. You need to understand your place here, and that place isn't among the future leaders of the American military." Other cadets continued passing through the courtyard, some pausing to watch the confrontation unfold. Sarah noticed that none of the observers seemed inclined to intervene or even express disapproval of what they were witnessing. The culture of the academy often reinforced hierarchies based on family connections and social standing rather than individual merit. "My place is wherever my abilities and dedication take me," Sarah replied. "I won't apologize for working hard or achieving success through legitimate means." Kim laughed derisively. "Legitimate means? You think diversity quotas and political correctness represent legitimate paths to advancement? You're here because the academy needs to check boxes, not because you actually deserve to be here." The accusation stung because Sarah had heard variations of it throughout her military education. Questions about her qualifications seemed to follow her everywhere, despite her consistent academic excellence and leadership potential. She had learned to develop thick skin against such attacks, but they still affected her more than she cared to admit. "Check my transcripts," she said. "Compare my performance to any cadet in our class. The numbers don't lie, even if people choose to ignore them." Hayes stepped forward again, forcing Sarah to take another step backward. She was now standing at the base of the stone stairs, her heel touching the bottom step. The position felt vulnerable, trapped between four hostile cadets and the steep staircase behind her. "Numbers don't mean everything," Hayes said. "Leadership requires qualities that can't be measured in a classroom. It requires respect from subordinates, and that respect has to be earned through demonstrated competence under real pressure." "Which is exactly what I've been doing for 2 years," Sarah replied. "My performance in field exercises, tactical simulations, and leadership practicals has consistently exceeded academy standards." Wheeler's expression grew more aggressive. "Exceeding standards in training exercises isn't the same as proving yourself in actual combat situations. You can memorize textbooks and perform well in controlled environments, but that doesn't translate to real-world leadership capability." The argument was becoming circular, with each side repeating their positions without finding common ground. Sarah realized that reason and logic wouldn't resolve this confrontation. These four cadets had already made up their mind about her worthiness, and no amount of evidence would change their perspective. "I'm not going to continue this discussion," she said, attempting once again to move around them. "I have responsibilities to attend to, just like everyone else at this academy." But Morrison stepped directly in front of her, his chest almost touching hers. The intimidation tactic was obvious and deliberate, designed to make her feel small and powerless in the face of their collective hostility. "You'll continue this discussion until we decide it's finished," he said quietly, his voice carrying an unmistakable threat. Sarah looked around the courtyard, hoping to see a faculty member or senior cadet who might intervene. But the morning class change had ended, and most students had already reached their destinations. The few remaining cadets in the area seemed determined to avoid getting involved in what was clearly becoming a serious confrontation. "Step aside," she said, her voice remaining steady despite her growing concern about the situation. Wheeler shook his head slowly. "Not until you acknowledge what everyone already knows. You don't belong here, and your presence diminishes the reputation of every legitimate cadet at this academy." The insult was designed to provoke an emotional response, but Sarah had learned to control her reactions during her time at Westfield. Military training emphasized discipline and emotional regulation, skills that serve her well in moments like this. My presence here is legitimate and earned, she said calmly. If you have concerns about academy policies or admissions procedures, I suggest you address them through proper channels. Kim laughed again. Proper channels? You mean the same politically correct bureaucrats who let you in here in the first place? They're not going to listen to legitimate concerns about maintaining standards. The conversation had revealed the true nature of their objections. This wasn't really about Sarah's individual qualifications or performance. It was about broader changes in military culture that threatened the traditional power structures these cadets had expected to inherit. Standards aren't being lowered, Sarah replied. They're being applied more fairly to a broader range of candidates. Excellence comes in many forms, and the military is stronger when it draws from all segments of society. Hayes sneered at her response. Spare us this social justice lecture. We know what we're seeing, and what we're seeing is the degradation of an institution that used to mean something. Sarah realized that further argument would be pointless. These four cadets had constructed a worldview that couldn't be challenged by facts or reason. Their sense of entitlement was too deeply rooted to be shaken by evidence of her competence or dedication. She took a deep breath and made a decision that would change everything. This conversation is over, she said firmly, stepping toward the stairs. But as she moved, Wheeler reached out and grabbed her arm. His grip was strong enough to leave marks, and the action crossed a line that even the Academy's informal codes of conduct couldn't ignore. "Let go of me," Sarah said, her voice sharp with authority. Instead of releasing her, Wheeler's grip tightened. Morrison and Kim moved closer, creating a wall of hostility that trapped her against the stairs. The situation had escalated beyond verbal intimidation into physical restraint. "You need to learn respect," Wheeler said, his face inches from hers. "Respect for tradition, respect for hierarchy, and respect for people who actually belong in positions of leadership." Sarah tried to pull her arm free, but Wheeler's grip was too strong. The physics textbook fell from her other hand, pages fluttering as it hit the concrete. The sound seemed unnaturally loud in the morning air. "Release me immediately," she commanded, using the tone of authority she had learned in leadership training. But her words only seemed to anger Wheeler more. His three companions closed in further, their bodies blocking any potential escape route except up the stairs behind her. "You don't give orders here," Morrison said. "You follow them, and we're ordering you to acknowledge reality before this gets worse for everyone involved." The threat was explicit now, and Sarah understood that the situation had moved beyond verbal intimidation into something much more dangerous. For physically larger cadets had surrounded her. One was restraining her against her will, and they were making demands backed by implied violence. She looked up at the stone stairs behind her, measuring the distance to the building entrance. 15 steep steps led to the doorway, where she might find safety among other students and faculty members. But reaching that sanctuary would require getting past the four cadets blocking her path. "Last chance," Wheeler said, his grip on her arm becoming painful. "Admit you don't belong here, request a transfer, and save everyone the trouble of dealing with this problem through other means." Sarah met his eyes directly, her voice calm and clear. "I belong here as much as anyone. I earned my place through merit, and I won't be intimidated into abandoning my goals by people who mistake privilege for qualification." Wheeler's face flushed with anger at her refusal to submit. Morrison, Kim, and Hayes exchanged glances that seemed to communicate a shared decision about how to proceed. "Wrong answer," Wheeler said. What happened next unfolded in slow motion, each detail burning itself into Sarah's memory with perfect clarity. Wheeler's hand on her arm suddenly twisted, throwing her off balance. Morrison's shoulder hit her chest, the impact driving the air from her lungs. Kim's foot swept her legs, eliminating any chance of maintaining her footing. And then she was falling backward up the stone stairs, her body tumbling helplessly against the unforgiving surface. Each impact sent sharp pain through her back, her shoulders, her head. The iron handrail struck her ribs as she tried desperately to grab something to stop her fall. The world spun around her, stone and sky alternating in her vision as she rolled up the steps. Pain exploded through her skull as her head struck the edge of a stair. Her left wrist bent at an impossible angle as she tried to break her fall, sending agony shooting up her arm. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, her body came to rest near the top of the stairs. She lay motionless on the cold stone, her vision blurred, and her mind struggling to process what had just happened. Blood trickled from a gash on her forehead, staining the gray stone beneath her head. Below her, the 4 cadets stood at the bottom of the stairs, their expressions showing a mixture of shock and satisfaction. Wheeler looked down at her motionless form, his face revealing no remorse for what he had just done. "Maybe now you'll understand," he called up to her, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air. Then they walked away, their boots echoing off the brick walls as they disappeared into the maze of academy buildings. Other cadets who had witnessed the incident scattered quickly, unwilling to become involved in something that could affect their own standing at the academy. Sarah lay alone on the stone steps, pain radiating through her body and consciousness fading in and out like a flickering light. The physics textbook remained on the concrete below, its pages fluttering in the morning breeze like broken wings. The consequences of the next few hours would ripple through the academy, the military establishment, and the lives of everyone involved in ways that none of them could have anticipated. Professor Elizabeth Martinez arrived at the science building 20 minutes after her scheduled class time, apologizing to the waiting students for her delayed start. As the senior physics instructor at Westfield Military Academy, she prided herself on punctuality and rarely kept her cadets waiting. But a meeting with the department head had run longer than expected, leaving her rushing across campus to reach her classroom. "Has anyone seen Cadet Chun?" she asked, noticing the empty seat in the front row where Sarah always sat. "She's never missed a class without prior notification." The assembled cadets exchanged glances but remained silent. Professor Martinez had taught at the academy long enough to recognize the subtle signs of student unrest, and the atmosphere in her classroom felt unusually tense this morning. "Very well, we'll begin without her," Martinez said, though concern gnawed at her thoughts. Sarah Chan was one of her most dedicated students, and her absence was completely out of character. As Martinez began writing equations on the whiteboard, a commotion outside the building interrupted her lecture. Shouting voices carried through the windows, followed by the sound of running footsteps on concrete. Several cadets craned their necks to look outside, their attention clearly divided between the lesson and whatever was happening in the courtyard. "Eyes forward, please," Martinez instructed, but her own curiosity had been aroused by the disturbance. The classroom door burst open without warning, and Cadet Jennifer Walsh stumbled inside, her face pale and her breathing rapid. Walsh was typically composed and professional, but now she appeared genuinely shaken by something she had witnessed. "Professor Martinez," Walsh said urgently, "there's been an incident. Cadet Chun is hurt badly. Someone called for medical assistance, but she's unconscious on the stairs outside." Martinez dropped her marker immediately. "What kind of incident?" "I think she fell down the stairs," Walsh replied, though her hesitation suggested there might be more to the story. "She's bleeding from her head, and she's not responding when people try to wake her up." Without another word, Martinez rushed from the classroom, her students following behind despite her shouted instruction for them to remain seated. Medical emergencies took priority over everything else at the academy, and every cadet had been trained in basic first aid procedures. Outside the building, Martinez found Sarah lying motionless near the top of the stone stairs, a pool of blood slowly expanding beneath her head. Her left arm was twisted at an unnatural angle, and her face was ashen except for the bright red blood flowing from a deep gash on her forehead. "Has anyone checked for a pulse?" Martinez asked as she knelt beside Sarah's still form. Cadet Thompson, who had discovered Sarah's body, nodded grimly. "Pulse is weak, but steady. She's been unconscious since I found her about 5 minutes ago." I didn't want to move her in case she had spinal injuries. Martinez carefully examined Sarah without disturbing her position. The head wound was serious enough to require immediate medical attention, and the awkward angle of her left wrist suggested a probable fracture. But what concerned Martinez most was Sarah's continued unconsciousness, which could indicate a concussion or more severe brain trauma. "Where is the medical team?" she asked, looking around the growing crowd of cadets and faculty members who had gathered at the scene. "Academy Medical is en route," replied Captain James Sullivan, a tactical instructor who had arrived moments earlier. "I also called for an ambulance from the civilian hospital in case we need more advanced trauma care." Martinez nodded approvingly. The Academy's medical facility was well equipped for routine injuries and illnesses, but serious trauma cases often required transfer to the regional medical center where neurosurgery and other specialized services were available. The sound of approaching sirens filled the air as both Academy medics and civilian paramedics responded to the emergency call. The first responders arrived simultaneously, their vehicles creating a minor traffic jam in a normally orderly courtyard. "What happened here?" asked Dr. Patricia Wong, the Academy's chief medical officer, as she approached with a medical kit and portable stretcher. "Cadet Chen apparently fell down these stairs," Captain Sullivan replied. "She's been unconscious for approximately 10 minutes, with obvious head trauma and a possible broken wrist." Dr. Wong began a rapid assessment of Sarah's condition while the civilian paramedics prepared their equipment. Her examination was thorough but gentle, designed to evaluate the extent of injuries without causing additional harm through unnecessary movement. "Definite concussion, possibly more severe," Dr. Wong announced. "The wrist is fractured, and she's got multiple contusions consistent with impact against stone surfaces. We need to get her to the hospital for a CT scan and proper neurological evaluation." As the medical teams worked to stabilize Sarah for transport, Professor Martinez began questioning the cadets who had gathered at the scene. Something about the situation didn't feel right to her, and her years of experience had taught her to trust her instincts when dealing with unusual incidents. "Did anyone actually see what happened?" she asked the assembled students. The cadets looked uncomfortable, exchanging glances but avoiding direct eye contact with Martinez or the other faculty members present. Their reluctance to speak was obvious and troubling. Cadet Walsh stepped forward hesitantly. "I saw 4 cadets talking with her at the bottom of the stairs earlier, but I was too far away to hear what they were discussing." "Who were the 4 cadets?" Captain Sullivan asked, his voice carrying the authority of a senior instructor. Walsh hesitated again, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the questioning. "I think it was Wheeler, Morrison, Kim, and Hayes, but I can't be completely certain from the distance I was at." Martinez felt a cold anger building in her chest. She knew those 4 names well, not because of their academic performance, which was mediocre at best, but because of their attitudes towards students they considered beneath their social standing. Each came from a military family with significant influence, and they had never bothered to hide their belief that certain people didn't belong at the academy. "Where are those 4 cadets now?" she asked. "I think they went to their next classes after the conversation ended," Walsh replied. "I didn't see them around when I found Cadet Chen on the stairs." Dr. Wong looked up from her patient. "We need to move her now. The unconsciousness is lasting too long, and I'm concerned about intracranial pressure." The paramedics carefully lifted Sarah onto their stretcher, securing her head and neck with specialized braces designed to prevent further injury during transport. Her body looked small and fragile against the medical equipment, a stark contrast to the confident young woman who had walked across the courtyard less than an hour earlier. As the ambulance pulled away with Sarah inside, Professor Martinez turned to Captain Sullivan with a grim expression. "We need to investigate this incident immediately. If what I suspect happened actually occurred, we're looking at a serious assault rather than an accidental fall." Sullivan nodded, his own suspicions clearly aroused by the circumstances. "I'll contact the Academy's security office and request a formal investigation. We'll need to interview witnesses and examine the scene more thoroughly. But Before any official investigation could begin, Martinez decided to conduct some preliminary questioning of her own. As an experienced educator, she had developed skills for getting students to reveal information they might otherwise keep hidden. She approached a group of cadets who had been standing near the science building when she arrived. Their body language suggested they knew more about the incident than they were willing to admit publicly. "I need to know exactly what you observed this morning," she told them in a tone that brooked no evasion. "Cadet Chun is seriously injured, and if someone caused her harm deliberately, they need to be held accountable." Cadet Rodriguez, a sophomore from Sarah's tactical analysis class, looked nervously at his companions before speaking. "Professor, we saw Wheeler and his friends confronting Cadet Chun at the bottom of the stairs. They were standing really close to her, and it looked like they were trying to intimidate her." "What happened next?" Martinez asked. "We couldn't hear what they were saying, but the conversation looked heated," Rodriguez continued. "Then, suddenly, Cadet Chun was falling backward up the stairs, like she had been pushed or shoved." Martinez felt her worst suspicions being confirmed. "Did you see any of the 4 cadets actually make physical contact with her?" Rodriguez hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the implications of his testimony. "It happened so fast, and we were across the courtyard. But it didn't look like an accident, Professor. It looked like they did something to make her fall." Captain Sullivan had overheard the conversation, and his expression had grown increasingly grim. "This is now a criminal matter, as well as an academy disciplinary issue. We need to notify the base commander and the military police immediately." Martinez agreed, but she also understood that the next few hours would be critical for gathering evidence and witness statements. If Wheeler, Morrison, Kim, and Hayes had indeed assaulted Sarah, they would likely coordinate their stories and attempt to cover up their actions. "We need to separate those 4 cadets immediately and interview them individually before they have a chance to get their stories straight," she said. Sullivan was already reaching for his radio to contact Academy security. The investigation would need to be handled carefully, given the family connections and political influence represented by the suspected perpetrators. But the evidence of wrongdoing was mounting, and even family influence had limits when serious crimes were involved. As word of the incident spread across campus, reactions among students and faculty began to reveal the deep divisions that existed within the academy community. Some cadets expressed shock and sympathy for Sarah, while others seemed to view the incident as an unfortunate but inevitable result of social tensions that had been building for months. Professor Martinez encountered several faculty members who made disturbing comments about the situation. "Maybe this will finally convince certain people that they don't belong here," muttered Colonel Harrison, the military history instructor. "Some lessons can only be learned through harsh experience." Martinez was appalled by the callousness of such remarks, but she also recognized that Harrison's attitude reflected a broader resistance to changes in academy culture that many senior faculty members privately opposed. The academy's administration faced a delicate balancing act. They needed to investigate the incident thoroughly and hold wrongdoers accountable, but they also had to consider the political ramifications of accusations against cadets from prominent military families. By noon, news of Sarah's hospitalization had reached the highest levels of the military hierarchy. General Patricia Stone, who served on the Joint Chiefs of Staff, received a briefing about the incident from her aide during a meeting at the Pentagon. Her reaction was immediate and decisive. "Give me a detailed report on this situation within the hour," she ordered. "If cadets at one of our premier military academies are resorting to physical violence against their classmates, we have a serious problem that needs immediate attention." Similar reactions were occurring throughout the military establishment as word of the incident spread through official channels. The assault of a female cadet by male classmates touched on sensitive issues of military culture, gender integration, and the ongoing efforts to address harassment and discrimination within the armed forces. At the hospital, Dr. Jennifer Hayes, the neurologist evaluating Sarah's condition, delivered troubling news to the academy officials who had accompanied her. The CT scan shows significant brain swelling, and we're detecting signs of subdural hematoma. She's going to need surgery to relieve the pressure, and even then, we can't predict the long-term effects. The news hit Professor Martinez like a physical blow. Sarah had been one of her brightest students, a young woman with exceptional potential who represented the future of military leadership. Now, that future hung in the balance because of an act of senseless violence. As Sarah was wheeled into the operating room, Martinez made a silent promise to herself. Justice would be served, regardless of who was involved or how much political pressure was brought to bear. The Academy's honor code demanded nothing less, and Sarah deserved nothing less. But Martinez also understood that the real battle was just beginning. The next few hours would determine not only Sarah's medical fate, but also the future of everyone involved in the morning's tragic events. The sound of helicopter rotors overhead announced the arrival of senior military officials who had been dispatched to take direct control of the investigation. The stakes had escalated far beyond a simple academy disciplinary matter. Within minutes, the entire campus would be sealed, and 3 generals would begin asking questions that some people very much did not want to answer. General Patricia Stone stepped out of the military helicopter before its rotors had completely stopped spinning, her boots hitting the Academy's landing pad with the decisive force of someone accustomed to taking immediate action. At 52 years old, she had earned her position on the Joint Chiefs of Staff through 3 decades of exemplary service, including combat tours in Afghanistan and Iraq, where she had commanded troops under the most challenging conditions imaginable. Behind her emerged General Michael Crawford, the Army's Deputy Chief of Staff for Personnel, whose responsibilities included overseeing military education institutions throughout the system. Crawford had spent his entire career working to modernize military training while maintaining the highest standards of professional conduct. The third member of their team was General Lisa Rodriguez, the first female superintendent of a major military academy, and currently serving as special advisor on military culture reform. Rodriguez had built her reputation by successfully addressing harassment and discrimination issues at installations across the globe. Together, these 3 generals represented the highest levels of military leadership, and their unprecedented joint arrival at Westfield Academy sent a clear message about the seriousness with which the Pentagon viewed the morning's events. "Brief me on the current situation," General Stone commanded as Academy Commandant Colonel William Barnes approached their group. Barnes, normally confident and composed in his role overseeing daily Academy operations, appeared visibly shaken by the rapid escalation of events. "Ma'am, Cadet Shun is currently in surgery for traumatic brain injury sustained in what appears to be an assault by 4 male cadets. The incident occurred approximately 3 hours ago, and we've been conducting preliminary interviews with witnesses." General Crawford's expression darkened. "Have the suspected perpetrators been taken into custody? We've isolated them for individual questioning, but no formal arrests have been made pending completion of the investigation," Barnes replied carefully. General Rodriguez studied Barnes intently. "Colonel, I want to be very clear about something. This investigation will be conducted according to military justice standards, not academy politics. Family connections and political influence will have no bearing on our findings or recommendations." The implied criticism was obvious, and Barnes understood that his handling of the situation was already being evaluated by superiors who had the authority to end his career with a single decision. "Understood completely, ma'am," Barnes replied. "We've preserved the crime scene and separated all potential witnesses to prevent coordination of testimony." General Stone was already walking toward the Academy's main administrative building, her pace indicating urgency and determination. "I want to speak with the investigating officers immediately, followed by interviews with the key witnesses and the accused cadets." The 3 generals moved through the Academy grounds with the kind of purposeful efficiency that only comes from years of military training. Their presence was already affecting the entire campus atmosphere, as cadets and faculty members recognized that something extraordinary was happening. In the Academy's main conference room, Colonel Sarah Mitchell, the head of Academy Security, was coordinating the investigation with Captain Robert Chun, the military police officer who had been dispatched from the base's main security office. Both officers had extensive experience with serious criminal investigations, but the political sensitivities surrounding this case created additional complications. What do we know about the alleged perpetrators? General Crawford asked as he reviewed the preliminary incident report. Colonel Mitchell opened her briefing folder. Cadet Marcus Wheeler, son of General Robert Wheeler, currently serving as commander of the 3rd Army. Cadet James Morrison, grandson of General William Morrison, deceased, but his family maintains significant influence within military circles. Cadet David Kim, son of Colonel Patricia Kim, serving in the Pentagon's Strategic Planning Division. And Cadet Robert Hayes, nephew of Colonel Michael Hayes, currently stationed at Fort Bragg. General Stone's expression revealed no emotion, but her years of experience had taught her to recognize the pattern immediately. 4 cadets with extensive family connections and positions of military authority, accused of assaulting a cadet with no such connections. Yes, ma'am, Mitchell replied, and preliminary witness statements suggest the assault was preceded by verbal confrontation about Cadet Chen's qualifications and right to attend this academy. General Rodriguez leaned forward her chair. So we're potentially looking at both assault and harassment based on gender and possibly ethnic bias. This isn't just about individual criminal conduct. It's about systemic cultural problems within our military education system. Captain Chun presented additional findings from his preliminary investigation. Security cameras cover most of the academy grounds, but unfortunately, the specific location where the incident occurred has a blind spot due to building placement. However, cameras did capture the 4 accused cadets approaching Cadet Chen's location and leaving the area shortly after the estimated time of the assault. What about witness testimony? General Crawford asked. We have multiple cadets who observed portions of the confrontation from various distances, Chen replied. Their statements are consistent regarding the aggressive nature of the interaction and the fact that Cadet Chun appeared to be attempting to leave when a physical altercation occurred. General Stone stood and walked to the conference room window overlooking the academy courtyard. The stone stairs where Sarah had been found were visible from this vantage point, and she could see the blood stains that hadn't yet been cleaned from the steps. I want to interview the accused cadets personally, she announced, starting with Wheeler. Colonel Barnes shifted inconfortably. Ma'am, I should mention that we've already received several phone calls from senior officers inquiring about this incident. General Robert Wheeler has requested updates on his son's status, and there seems to be considerable interest at high levels. General Rodriguez's voice carried a warning tone. Colonel, I hope you understand that any attempt to interfere with this investigation or influence witness testimony will be viewed as obstruction of justice. Military rank doesn't provide immunity from criminal prosecution. Barnes nodded quickly. Of course, ma'am. All investigation procedures are being followed strictly according to regulations. General Stone returned to her seat. Bring in Cadet Wheeler first. I want to hear his version of events before we proceed with the others. 20 minutes later, Cadet Marcus Wheeler entered the conference room under escort. His usual arrogant demeanor had been replaced by obvious nervousness, though he attempted to maintain a facade of confidence as he faced the 3 generals. General Stone began the interview without preamble. Cadet Wheeler, you are suspected of participating in the assault of Cadet Sarah Chun this morning. You have the right to remain silent and to request legal counsel. Do you understand these rights? Wheeler's face paled slightly. Yes, ma'am, I understand. But I want to clarify that this is all a misunderstanding. No assault took place. General Crawford consulted his notes. Multiple witnesses observed you and 3 other cadets confronting Cadet Chun in an aggressive manner immediately before she sustained serious injuries falling down a flight of stairs. How do you explain that coincidence? Sir, we were having a conversation with Cadet Chun about academy standards and expectations, Wheeler replied. It was a normal discussion between cadets, nothing more than that. General Rodriguez leaned forward. A normal discussion? Witnesses describe you and your companions surrounding Cadet Chun in a threatening manner and physically preventing her from leaving the area. Is that your definition of normal conversation? Wheeler's composure began to crack under the intense questioning. Ma'am, there may have been some disagreement about certain issues, but we never intended for anyone to get hurt. What issues? General Stone asked sharply. Wheeler hesitated, realizing that any answer could incriminate him further. We were concerned about maintaining traditional academy standards and ensuring that all cadets meet appropriate qualifications for military leadership. General Crawford's voice carried dangerous undertones. Are you suggesting that Cadet Chin doesn't meet academy standards? Because her academic record indicates performance in the top 5% of her class. Academic performance isn't everything, sir, Wheeler replied, his voice growing defensive. Military leadership requires other qualities that can't be measured through test scores. General Rodriguez stood from her chair, her presence filling the room with authority. Cadet Wheeler, what you're describing sounds suspiciously like harassment based on gender and ethnic bias. Are you prepared to explain exactly what qualifications you believe Cadet Chin lacks? The question trapped Wheeler in a logical corner. Any specific criticisms of Sarah's qualifications could be easily disproven by her documented performance record, while vague statements about leadership capability would appear to be based on discriminatory assumptions. I think I should speak with a lawyer before answering any more questions, Wheeler finally said. General Stone made a note in her file. That's your right, Cadet Wheeler. But understand that your request for legal counsel will be noted in our report, along with your inability to provide any specific justification for your actions this morning. Wheeler was escorted from the room, and the three generals spent several minutes discussing their observations before requesting the next interview subject. Cadet James Morrison entered the conference room with even greater apprehension than Wheeler had shown. The preliminary questioning of his friend had clearly shaken his confidence about their ability to escape consequences for their actions. Cadet Morrison, General Crawford began, we've just finished speaking with Cadet Wheeler, who was unable to provide any credible explanation for this morning's incident. Perhaps you can help us understand what really happened. Morrison attempted to maintain his composure, but his voice betrayed his nervousness. Sir, I'm not sure what Cadet Wheeler told you, but we were just talking with Cadet Chun about academy traditions and expectations. General Rodriguez interrupted him. Several witnesses have stated that you physically blocked Cadet Chin's path when she attempted to leave your conversation. Is that accurate? Ma'am, there may have been some misunderstanding about personal space, but we weren't trying to prevent her from going anywhere, Morrison replied. General Stone's patience was clearly wearing thin. Cadet Morrison, we have witness testimony indicating that you and your companion surrounded Cadet Chin, physically restrained her, and made threatening statements about consequences if she didn't comply with your demands. Do you deny these allegations? Morrison's face flushed with panic. Ma'am, if something like that happened, it was a misunderstanding that got out of hand. We never intended for anyone to get seriously hurt. The admission was significant, and all three generals noted it carefully. General Crawford pressed further. So you acknowledge that Cadet Chun was injured as a result of actions taken by you and your companions? Morrison realized his mistake immediately. Sir, I'm not saying we caused her injuries. I'm just saying that if our conversation became heated, we regret any misunderstanding that occurred. General Rodriguez stood and walked around the conference table until she was directly facing Morrison. Cadet, let me explain something to you. Cadet Chun is currently in surgery for traumatic brain injury that could affect her for the rest of her life. This isn't a misunderstanding or an accident. This is a serious assault that appears to have been motivated by bias and harassment. Morrison's resolve crumbled completely under the weight of the general's words. Ma'am, I swear we never meant for things to go this far. It was supposed to be just a conversation to help her understand how things work around here. General Stone leaned forward. Help her understand what, specifically? That some people belong here and others don't, Morrison replied before realizing the implications of his statement. The three generals exchanged glances, recognizing that Morrison had just provided a clear motive for the assault. General Crawford made notes while speaking. And you determined that Cadet Chin doesn't belong here based on what criteria? Morrison understood that he had backed himself into an impossible position. I think I need to speak with a legal advisor before answering any more questions. Like Wheeler before him, Morrison was escorted from the room after invoking his right to counsel. The interviews with Cadets Kim and Hayes followed similar patterns, with both young men providing contradictory statements and eventually requesting legal representation when their inconsistencies became apparent. By late afternoon, the three generals had compiled enough evidence to reach preliminary conclusions about what had occurred. The pattern of testimony, combined with physical evidence and witness statements, painted a clear picture of premeditated assault motivated by bias and harassment. General Stone addressed her colleagues as they prepared their initial report. This incident represents exactly the kind of toxic culture we've been working to eliminate from military institutions. For cadets with privileged backgrounds felt entitled to physically assault a classmate because they disagreed with her presence at this academy. General Rodriguez nodded grimly. The family connections involved are going to make this politically complicated, but we can't allow influence and privilege to override justice and accountability. General Crawford was already planning the next steps in their investigation. We need to examine whether this incident represents an isolated case or part of a broader pattern of harassment and discrimination at this academy. As evening approached, the three generals made a decision that would have far-reaching consequences for everyone involved. They recommended that Westfield Military Academy be placed under direct federal oversight, pending completion of a comprehensive investigation into institutional culture and practices. The recommendation would effectively seal the base under military law, with all personnel restricted from leaving until the investigation concluded. The decision was communicated to the Pentagon, approved within the hour, and implemented immediately. Westfield Military Academy was officially closed to outside contact, and the Real investigation was about to begin. The official lockdown of Westfield Military Academy began at precisely 1800 hours, as military police vehicles surrounded the perimeter and electronic jamming equipment blocked all unauthorized communications from base. General Stone had implemented the most comprehensive investigation protocol in the Academy's history, treating the institution as a potential crime scene requiring preservation of evidence and isolation of witnesses. Inside the Academy's medical facility, Dr. Patricia Wong received the first positive news of the day. The neurosurgeon at Regional Medical Center had successfully relieved the pressure on Sarah's brain, and early indicators suggested that permanent cognitive damage might be limited. However, Sarah remained in a medically induced coma while her brain tissue healed from the trauma. Her vital signs have stabilized, Dr. Wong reported to Professor Martinez during a late evening briefing. But we won't know the full extent of neurological impact until she regains consciousness, which could be days or weeks from now. Martinez had remained at the hospital throughout Sarah's surgery, feeling a personal responsibility for her students' welfare that went beyond normal academic duty. She had taught hundreds of cadets during her tenure at the academy, but Sarah represented something special, proof that excellence could emerge from any background when given proper opportunity and support. Back at the academy, the three generals had established a command center in the main administrative building, where they coordinated multiple investigation teams working around the clock to uncover the truth about institutional culture and practices. What they discovered during the first night of intensive interviews shocked even these experienced military leaders. General Rodriguez emerged from a series of interviews with female cadets looking deeply disturbed. We're uncovering a pattern of systematic harassment and intimidation that goes far beyond this morning's assault, she reported to her colleagues. Female cadets have been subjected to ongoing verbal abuse, physical intimidation, and deliberate exclusion from informal leadership networks. General Crawford had been reviewing personnel files and disciplinary records, finding disturbing trends in how complaints have been handled by Academy administration. There have been 17 formal harassment complaints filed in the past 2 years, and 15 of them were dismissed without meaningful investigation. The pattern suggests institutional tolerance for discriminatory behavior. General Stone studied the preliminary reports with growing anger. How did this situation deteriorate so badly without intervention from higher military authority? The answer came from Colonel Barnes during a tense interview session that stretched past midnight. Under intense questioning, the Academy Commandant revealed a web of informal policies and unwritten rules that had allowed harassment to flourish while protecting perpetrators with family connections. Sir, we've always tried to handle internal matters through traditional military discipline rather than formal legal proceedings, Barnes explained defensively. The informal approach usually resolves conflicts without damaging careers or creating publicity problems for the institution. General Rodriguez's voice carried unmistakable fury. Colonel Barnes, what you're describing isn't conflict resolution. It's systematic cover-up of criminal behavior. You've created an environment where privileged cadets believe they can assault their classmates without consequences. Barnes attempted to justify his approach. Ma'am, we've always emphasized maintaining unit cohesion and institutional reputation. Formal investigations and legal proceedings can damage morale and undermine the Academy's standing in the broader military community. General Crawford leaned across the conference table. Colonel, your institutional reputation is now permanently damaged because you chose to protect criminals rather than victims. The military community is going to remember this academy as the place where assault was tolerated as long as the perpetrators came from the right families. As the night progressed, the investigation teams uncovered increasingly disturbing evidence of institutional dysfunction. Female faculty members revealed that they had been excluded from key decision-making processes and subjected to subtle but persistent professional discrimination. Minority cadets described experiencing constant questioning of their qualifications and belonging, creating psychological pressure that affected their academic performance and military training. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the Academy psychologist, provided particularly damning testimony about the mental health impacts of the toxic culture. I've treated dozens of cadets for anxiety, depression, and trauma-related symptoms directly connected to harassment and discrimination they experienced at this institution. Many of these students had excellent mental health before arriving here. The evidence painted a clear picture of an institution that had systematically failed in its duty to provide equal opportunity and protection for all cadets. The assault on Sarah Chun wasn't an isolated incident, but rather the inevitable culmination of years of unchecked harassment and institutional indifference. General Stone convened an emergency session with her fellow generals as dawn approached. We're looking at criminal prosecution for the 4 perpetrators, removal of senior academy leadership, and comprehensive reform of institutional policies and culture. General Rodriguez added her assessment. This case is going to become a landmark in military justice. The Pentagon will need to demonstrate that harassment and assault have no place in military institutions, regardless of who the perpetrators are or what family connections they possess. The political ramifications were already beginning to unfold as word of the investigation leaked to news media, despite the communication blackout. By morning, major news networks were reporting on the sealed military academy and the assault investigation, creating pressure for quick resolution and accountability. At 700 hours, General Robert Wheeler, Marcus Wheeler's father, arrived at the academy gates demanding access to his son. The confrontation between the 3-star general and the military police guards created an additional crisis that tested the investigation's independence from political pressure. I demand to speak with my son immediately, General Wheeler told the MPs blocking his entrance. As his father and as a senior military officer, I have the right to ensure he receives proper legal representation. The MP sergeant, following strict orders from General Stone, remained unmoved by Wheeler's rank and demands. Sir, this installation is under federal lockdown pending completion of a criminal investigation. No unauthorized personnel are permitted access, regardless of military rank or family relationships. General Wheeler's face reddened with anger. "Sergeant, I'm ordering you to step aside. I'm a three-star general in the United States Army, and I will not be denied access by subordinate personnel." "Sir, my orders come directly from General Stone, and those orders supersede any other authority," the sergeant replied calmly. "You're welcome to contact the Pentagon if you have concerns about investigation procedures." The confrontation escalated when General Wheeler attempted to physically push past the guards, resulting in his temporary detention by military police. The incident was recorded by news media gathered outside the academy, creating additional public relations problems for the military establishment. Inside the academy, news of his father's arrest reached Marcus Wheeler during another round of interrogation. The additional pressure caused his remaining composure to crumble completely, and he finally began providing truthful accounts of what had occurred the previous morning. "We planned it," he admitted to General Stone during a session that would prove crucial to the prosecution case. "We decided that Chun needed to learn her place, and we thought physical intimidation would accomplish that goal more effectively than verbal warnings." General Stone carefully documented Wheeler's confession while maintaining her professional demeanor. "So you're admitting to premeditated assault?" "Yes, ma'am," Wheeler replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "We didn't intend for her to be injured as seriously as she was, but we definitely intended to use physical force to make our point." General Crawford pressed for additional details. "Whose idea was the physical assault?" Wheeler hesitated before answering. "It was a group decision, sir. We all agreed that traditional approaches hadn't been effective in making Chun understand that she didn't belong here. General Rodriguez documented the discriminatory motive, and you determined that Cadet Chun didn't belong at this academy based on what specific qualifications or performance deficiencies?" Wheeler's answer revealed the true nature of their bias. "She's not one of us, ma'am. She doesn't come from a military family, she doesn't understand military traditions, and her presence here changes the character of the institution." The confession provided crucial evidence for both criminal prosecution and civil rights violations. Wheeler's admission of premeditated assault motivated by bias would ensure serious legal consequences for all four perpetrators. Similar confessions emerged from the other three cadets as the pressure of isolation and intensive interrogation overcame their initial attempts at denial. Morrison admitted to physically restraining Sarah while Wheeler pushed her down the stairs. Kim acknowledged helping to surround and intimidate her before the assault. Hayes confessed to participating in the planning and execution of the attack. By afternoon, the criminal case against the four cadets was solidly established through physical evidence, witness testimony, and their own confessions. But the broader implications of the investigation were still unfolding as teams of military investigators continued examining institutional practices and culture. The medical update from Regional Medical Center provided mixed news. Sarah had regained consciousness briefly, but remained unable to communicate effectively due to brain swelling and medication effects. Doctors were cautiously optimistic about her long-term recovery prospects, but warned that cognitive and physical rehabilitation could take months or years. Professor Martinez received permission to visit Sarah in the intensive care unit, where she found her student connected to multiple monitoring devices but showing signs of awareness. Sarah's eyes tracked movement and seemed to recognize familiar faces, encouraging indicators for neurological recovery. "The doctors say you're going to recover completely," Martinez told Sarah during her visit. "Your attackers have confessed, and they're going to face full prosecution for what they did to you. Justice will be served." Sarah couldn't respond verbally, but her grip on Martinez's hand tightened slightly, indicating that she understood and appreciated the support. As evening approached, General Stone prepared for the most difficult phase of the investigation, determining accountability among senior academy leadership and military officials who had enabled the toxic culture through years of willful blindness and institutional protection of privileged perpetrators. The preliminary findings would shock the military establishment and lead to the most comprehensive reforms in military academy history. But First, for young men would learn that family connections and military tradition provided no protection from the consequences of criminal assault. The arraignment was scheduled for the following morning, and the charges would include not only assault, but also federal civil rights violations that carried potential sentences of decades in federal prison. The age of impunity at Westfield Military Academy was about to end forever. 6 months after the assault on the stone stairs, Westfield Military Academy bore little resemblance to the institution that had existed before General Stone and her team arrived to investigate institutional culture. The sweeping reforms implemented during the federal oversight period had transformed not only academy policies, but the fundamental character of military education at the institution. Sarah Chan walked slowly across the same courtyard where she had been attacked, her steps careful and deliberate as she continued recovering from the traumatic brain injury that had changed her life forever. Physical therapy had restored most of her motor functions, but cognitive rehabilitation remained an ongoing process that required patience and determination she had never needed to summon before. Dr. Jennifer Martinez, now serving as the Academy's interim superintendent following the removal of Colonel Barnes and his senior staff, watched Sarah's progress with a mixture of pride and concern. The brilliant student who had once effortlessly mastered complex physics equations now struggled with memory issues and concentration problems that made academic work infinitely more challenging. "How are you feeling today?" Martinez asked as she joined Sarah near the science building where the assault had occurred. "Better than yesterday, but not as good as I hope to feel tomorrow," Sarah replied, using the phrase that had become her standard response to questions about her recovery. The words represented her determination to focus on gradual improvement rather than dwelling on what she had lost. The stone steps where Sarah had fallen now featured a memorial plaque honoring victims of harassment and discrimination, installed as part of the Academy's commitment to acknowledging past failures and preventing future incidents. The inscription read simply, "Courage is not the absence of fear, but action in spite of it." The legal proceedings against Marcus Wheeler, James Morrison, David Kim, and Robert Hayes had concluded 3 months earlier with convictions on federal assault and civil rights violation charges. Wheeler received a sentence of 8 years in federal prison, while his 3 accomplices received terms ranging from 5 to 7 years. Their military careers had ended before they began, and their family connections had proven powerless against overwhelming evidence and public outcry. General Robert Wheeler had resigned his commission following the investigation's revelation that he had attempted to interfere with the criminal proceedings. Morrison's family lost significant political influence when their attempts to pressure Academy officials became public knowledge. The Kim and Hayes families faced similar consequences for their efforts to protect their sons from accountability. The broader institutional changes implemented at Westfield had created a model for reform throughout the military education system. General Rodriguez had been appointed as the Academy's permanent superintendent, bringing her expertise in cultural transformation to the daily operations of the institution. "The most important change isn't in our policies," Rodriguez explained to a visiting congressional delegation. "It's in our fundamental understanding that diversity of background and thought makes military institutions stronger, not weaker." The new Academy culture emphasized merit-based advancement, zero tolerance for harassment and discrimination, and comprehensive support systems for cadets from all backgrounds. Female enrollment had increased by 40% following the reforms, while academic performance indicators showed marked improvement across all demographic categories. Professor Martinez had documented the transformation process in a comprehensive report that would influence military education policy for decades. Her research demonstrated that inclusive institutional cultures produce superior military leaders compared to traditional systems based on family connections and social hierarchy. Sarah's own recovery had become a symbol of resilience and determination for the entire Academy community. Despite ongoing cognitive challenges, she had maintained her academic standing through modified coursework and extended time allowances that accommodation her brain injury symptoms. "I won't pretend this has been easy," Sarah told a group of prospective female cadets during a recruiting visit. The assault changed my life in ways I'm still discovering. But it also proved that our military institutions can evolve and improve when people refuse to accept injustice. The visiting students listened intently as Sarah described her experience and recovery process. Her honesty about ongoing challenges resonated with young women who had heard stories about harassment and discrimination at military academies, but were encouraged by evidence that meaningful change was possible. Dr. Patricia Wong, who had overseen Sarah's medical treatment from the initial trauma through her ongoing rehabilitation, marveled at her patient's psychological resilience. Sarah has demonstrated that recovery from traumatic brain injury requires not just medical treatment, but also supportive environment and meaningful purpose. Her determination to continue her military education despite significant challenges has inspired everyone involved in her care. The neurological impacts of the assault had required Sarah to develop new learning strategies and coping mechanisms that actually enhanced her ability to understand complex problems from multiple perspectives. Her tactical analysis papers, once praised for their analytical precision, now incorporated innovative approaches that reflected her unique cognitive processing style. Sometimes I think differently now, Sarah explained to her advanced physics class, where she served as a peer tutor for struggling students. The brain injury forced me to find new pathways for processing information, and those pathways sometimes reveal solutions that I wouldn't have discovered through conventional thinking. General Stone visited the academy regularly to monitor the implementation of reforms and ensure that positive changes continued without regression. During her most recent visit, she met privately with Sarah to discuss her future plans and career aspirations. Have the events of the past year changed your goals for military service? Stone asked during their conversation in the commandant's office. Sarah considered the question carefully before answering. They've clarified my goals rather than changing them. I want to serve in positions where I can help create the kind of military culture we've built here at the Academy. Inclusive leadership isn't just morally right, it's strategically necessary for national security. Stone nodded approvingly. Your experience has given you insights that will make you a more effective leader than you might have been otherwise. Adversity often reveals character and capability that comfortable circumstances never test. The conversation reflected broader changes in military leadership philosophy that had emerged from the Westfield investigation. Senior officers throughout the armed forces had begun recognizing that diversity and inclusion weren't political correctness, but operational necessities in an increasingly complex global security environment. The Academy's academic performance had improved dramatically under the new leadership and cultural norms. Graduation rates increased, honor code violations decreased, and post-graduation military service retention reached historic highs among graduates from underrepresented groups. Professor Martinez had been selected to lead a Pentagon study group examining best practices for military education reform based on the Westfield model. Her recommendations would influence policy at service academies and officer training programs throughout the military establishment. The most important lesson from this experience, Martinez wrote in her final report, is that institutional change requires courage from individuals willing to confront injustice, even when that confrontation involves personal risk and professional sacrifice. Sarah's academic advisor, Captain Susan Reynolds, had worked closely with her to develop a modified graduation timeline that accommodated her ongoing recovery needs while maintaining academic rigor. The individualized approach had become a model for supporting cadets with disabilities or special circumstances. Sarah's success demonstrates that accommodation doesn't mean lowering standards, Reynolds explained to other military educators. It means finding creative ways to evaluate competence and potential that don't unfairly penalize people for circumstances beyond their control. As Sarah approached her final year at the Academy, she had been selected for advanced leadership training that would prepare her for positions of significant responsibility upon graduation. Her experiences as both victim and survivor of assault had provided her with unique qualifications for addressing similar challenges in military units. The memorial plaque near the Science Building had become a focal point for Academy ceremonies honoring courage and resilience. During each graduation ceremony, the class valedictorian read the inscription aloud as a reminder that military service requires moral courage as well as physical bravery. Sarah's parents, who had traveled from California to attend the latest graduation ceremony, watched with pride as their daughter delivered the keynote address to incoming cadets. Her speech emphasized themes of perseverance, justice, and the responsibility of military leaders to protect those under their command. The uniform we wear represents ideals that are bigger than any individual, Sarah told the assembled cadets. When we defend those ideals, even in difficult circumstances, we honor everyone who has served before us and inspire those who will serve after us. The audience rose in sustained applause, recognizing not just Sarah's words but her embodiment of the principles she described. Her journey from victim to leader had become legendary within the Academy community, inspiring countless other cadets to stand up for their convictions despite potential consequences. General Rodriguez concluded the ceremony with remarks that connected Sarah's individual story to broader themes of institutional transformation and moral leadership. The courage displayed by Cadet Chun and others like her has made our military stronger and our nation more secure. Their willingness to confront injustice has created opportunities for future generations to serve with dignity and respect. As the ceremony ended and families gathered to congratulate new graduates, Sarah walked once more across the courtyard where her life had been forever changed. The stone steps still stood as they had that terrible morning, but they now represented something different. Proof that individuals could overcome even the most devastating setbacks through determination, support, and unwavering commitment to justice. The setting sun cast long shadows between the Academy buildings, just as it had on that morning 6 months earlier. But the culture those shadows now covered bore no resemblance to the toxic environment that had enabled 4 privileged cadets to believe they could assault a classmate without consequences. Sarah paused near the memorial plaque and read the inscription one more time. The words had taken on deeper meaning through her experience, representing not just an abstract ideal, but a lived reality that had required everything she could summon from within herself. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as she continued her recovery and prepared for military service in an institution she had helped transform. But tonight, she could take satisfaction in knowing that her suffering had not been in vain, and that future generations of cadets would inherit a military culture worthy of the ideals they had sworn to defend. The base was no longer sealed. The investigation was complete. Justice had been served, and Westfield Military Academy had become the institution it always should have been,